The cold November air clung to me like a shroud, its damp chill seeping through the fabric of my black wool coat. Each breath was a visible puff of smoke, a fleeting ghost in the grim afternoon. We were standing in Maple Creek Cemetery, a place I'd only ever visited on Memorial Day to lay flowers on my grandparents' graves. I never imagined I'd be here for Robert, my husband of 35 years. The freshly turned earth was a dark, gaping wound in the otherwise dormant grass, a stark reminder of the finality of it all. The scent of dirt and wilting lilies was overwhelming, a perfume for grief that would forever be etched in my memory. My son Ethan stood beside me, his tall frame rigid, his face a mask of stone. At 28, he was the spitting image of his father in his youth, the same sharp jawline, the same intense dark eyes. But the warmth that had always radiated from Robert was absent in Ethan. In its place was a coldness that seemed to rival the biting wind. He hadn't cried, not at the hospital, not at the funeral home, and not now, as the last handfuls of soil were tossed onto his father's casket. I wanted to reach out, to take his hand and feel the warmth of my child's skin, but a chasm had opened between us in the weeks since Robert's diagnosis, a silent, unnerving distance I didn't know how to cross. The last of the mourners had begun to disperse, their quiet condolences and sympathetic glances washing over me in a blur. My sister Clara gave my shoulder a final squeeze. "Call me if you need anything, Ellie. Anything at all," she whispered, her eyes full of genuine concern. I nodded, unable to form words. I watched her walk away, her husband's arm around her, until they were just figures in the distance, leaving me alone with my son at the edge of the grave. The silence that fell between us was heavy, punctuated only by the rustling of dry leaves skittering across the headstones. I looked at the raw earth, then at my son. His gaze was fixed on the grave, his expression unreadable. "He's really gone," I said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. I needed him to say something, anything to break this suffocating tension. I needed to know he was still my son, the boy I had raised, not this cold stranger. Ethan finally turned his head, but his eyes didn't meet mine. They scanned the horizon, then slowly, deliberately, they moved to me. There was something in them I hadn't seen before, not just grief, but a hard, resolute anger. It was unsettling. "At his father's grave," my son whispered. The words that followed would shatter the fragile remnants of my world far more completely than Robert's death already had. His voice was low, barely audible above the wind, but every word was a perfectly aimed dart. "This is my house," he said, the statement hanging in the air, devoid of context, yet heavy with intent. I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" "Our house. My house," he repeated, his gaze finally locking onto mine. It was piercing, accusatory. "Dad promised it to me, and I'm claiming it. You have until midnight to get your things and leave." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sounds of the cemetery, the distant traffic, the wind in the pines, faded into a dull roar. I must have misheard him. It was the grief, the stress, the exhaustion. People say strange things in moments like these. "Ethan, this isn't the time for jokes," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We're both exhausted, let's just go home." I made a move to take his arm, but he stepped back, a small, sharp movement of rejection. "I'm not joking, Mom," he said, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. "I want you out, you have until midnight. Out of my home, the home I built with your father. Ethan, what has gotten into you?" My confusion was rapidly giving way to a sickening dread. This wasn't a joke. He meant it, every cruel, insane word. "You heard me," he said. He looked down at the grave one last time, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Dad wouldn't have wanted you there. Not anymore. He told me everything." "Everything? What are you talking about?" "Your father and I loved each other. We had a life together." A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. "Did you? Or did you just have a comfortable arrangement?" He saw it for what it was at the end. He wanted me to make things right. "Make what right?" I cried, my voice cracking. Tears I had managed to hold back all day now streamed hot down my cold cheeks. This is madness. You can't just throw me out of my own house. I can. And I will, he stated, his finality like a judge's gavel. Midnight. Don't make me call the sheriff to escort you out. It would be unpleasant. He turned then and walked away, his posture unyielding, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. He didn't look back. He just left me there, standing by my husband's grave, with the echo of his impossible ultimatum ringing in my ears. The drive home was a surreal nightmare. The familiar streets of Maple Creek, the quaint houses with their welcoming porch lights just beginning to flicker on in the twilight, felt alien. I pulled into the driveway of the two-story colonial that had been my sanctuary for over 3 decades. It was more than brick and mortar. It was a living album of our lives. I could see Robert planting the oak tree in the front yard when Ethan was just a toddler. I could hear the phantom echoes of our daughter Lena's laughter as she learned to ride her bike on this very pavement. Now the house loomed before me not as a home, but as a battlefield, a prize to be won or lost. I unlocked the front door, the familiar click of the lock sounding ominous. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I was used to. It was a heavy, waiting silence. Ethan's car was in the driveway, which meant he was somewhere inside, a hostile presence in our shared space. I walked into the foyer, my heart pounding in my chest. My purse slipped from my numb fingers, its contents spilling across the polished hardwood floor. Lipstick, keys, a wallet, the mundane artifacts of a life that had just been violently upended. I left them there and walked into the living room. Ethan was standing by the fireplace, staring at the family portraits on the mantel. There was one of Robert and me on our wedding day, young and full of foolish, beautiful hope. There was another of the 4 of us on a vacation to the Grand Canyon, all squinting in the sun, Lena making rabbit ears behind Ethan's head. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice raw. He didn't turn around, he just pointed a finger at the wedding photo. "Was any of it real?" he asked, his voice thick with a bitterness that seemed ancient. "Of course it was real. Ethan, I loved your father. Love doesn't do what you did," he shot back, finally turning to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed now, and I realized he wasn't just cold, he was in agony, but it was an agony he was directing entirely at me. "You have 6 hours, Mom. The clock is ticking." He brushed past me and went upstairs. I heard his bedroom door click shut. I sank onto the sofa, the plush cushions offering no comfort. The living room, with its cozy armchairs and the Afghan I'd knitted years ago draped over the chaise lounge, felt like a stage set. My entire life felt like a performance, and my son had just declared it a sham. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from my parents. Its steady rhythmic ticking had always been a soothing sound, the heartbeat of our home. Now each tick was a countdown, marking the seconds until I became homeless, cast out by my own child on the very day I buried my husband. I didn't understand his accusations, his cryptic references to something I had done. What had Robert told him? What secret could possibly be dark enough to turn my loving son into this cruel, unforgiving stranger? I had until midnight to find out. The grandfather clock chimed 7, each dong reverberating through the silent house like a hammer blow against my sanity. 5 hours left. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. I couldn't just sit here and let him do this. I wouldn't. This was my home, but fighting him required ammunition, and right now all I had was confusion and a profound sense of betrayal. His words, "He told me everything," echoed in my mind. What everything? Robert had been sick for months, his mind clouded by pain and medication in those final weeks. Could he have become delusional? Or was there a truth he had hidden from me for decades, a truth he had chosen to share only with our son? My first instinct was to call my daughter Lena. She was a lawyer in Chicago, sharp and level-headed. She would know what to do, how to handle Ethan. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers still clumsy with shock, and dialed her number. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Lena. Please leave a message." Of course, she was probably in court or with a client. I left a rambling, tearful message, begging her to call me back the second she got it. Hanging up, I felt a fresh wave of isolation. I was on my own, my mind raced. If Robert had told Ethan something, there had to be a record of it somewhere. A letter, an email, a legal document. My husband was a meticulous man, a partner in an accounting firm. He documented everything. His entire professional life was built on ledgers and paper trails. His personal life was no different. My feet carried me, almost of their own accord, to the one room in the house that was exclusively Robert's, his study. It was at the back of the house, overlooking the garden. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the familiar scent of old books, leather, and his subtle, spicy aftershave enveloping me. It was like stepping into the past, a fresh stab of grief twisting in my gut. Everything was exactly as he had left it. His reading glasses were on top of a stack of files on his large mahogany desk. A coffee mug, stained with the ghost of his last cup, sat on a coaster. I took a deep breath, trying to push the sorrow aside and focus. Where would he hide something? Robert was organized, but he was also private. He had a filing cabinet, a desk with several drawers, and a personal safe hidden behind a framed print of the New England coastline. I started with the desk. The top drawers held stationery, pens, and other office supplies. The bottom right drawer, the one he always kept locked, was my target. I knew where he kept the key, in a small carved wooden box on the bookshelf. My hand trembled as I retrieved it and unlocked the drawer. Inside was a collection of personal documents, our marriage certificate, the kids' birth certificates, the deed to the house, and our wills. I pulled out the deed first. It was in both our names, Robert and Eleanor Muller. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. That meant the house automatically, legally, became mine upon his death. Ethan couldn't just claim it. Relief washed over me, cool and immediate. He had no legal standing. This was all just a cruel emotional power play. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a surge of confidence. I would confront him. I marched out of the study and up the stairs, the deed clutched in my hand like a shield. I didn't bother knocking on his door. I just pushed it open. He was sitting on his bed, his back to me, looking through an old photo album. "I have the deed, Ethan," I announced, my voice stronger now. "The house is in both our names. It's legally mine. This whole charade is over." He slowly closed the album and turned to face me. The anguish in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of profound pity. It was a look that unnerved me more than his anger. "I know about the deed, Mom," he said quietly. "This isn't about legalities. This is about what's right. Right. What is right about putting your grieving mother out on the street? You're not the only one who's grieving," he shot back, his voice rising. "But some of us are grieving the man he really was, not the man he pretended to be for you." "I don't know what that means." "Then you need to find out," he said, turning away again, a clear dismissal. "You're wasting time. 4 hours left." I retreated, my brief victory turning to ash in my mouth. He was right. The deed was a piece of paper. This battle was about something much deeper. I went back to the study, my mind reeling. What had I missed? What was I not seeing? I pulled out Robert's will, the one we'd drafted together with our lawyer, Jack Davison, 5 years ago. It was straightforward. Everything was left to me, and upon my death, the estate would be divided equally between Ethan and Lena. There was nothing in there about giving the house to Ethan. Could there be a newer will? It was possible. My next call was to Jack Davison. It was after 8 o'clock, but in a small town like Maple Creek, people didn't always keep strict 9 to 5 hours. He picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" His voice was laced with concern. "Jack, I'm sorry to bother you so late," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a strange question. Did Robert ever contact you about changing his will? Recently. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that made my blood run cold. Ellie, I'm Robert's lawyer, but you're my friend, he said carefully. And as your friend, I think you should be talking to Ethan about this. He's the one causing this, Jack. He's telling me I have to be out of my house by midnight. He says Robert promised it to him. Is that true? Did Robert make a new will? A formal will requires signatures, witnesses. It's a process, Jack hedged. Nothing new and official has been filed with my office. The way he phrased it, new and official, sent a clear message. There was something unofficial. What is it, Jack? What aren't you telling me? He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Robert called me about a month ago. He was distressed. He asked about the legalities of amending a will with a codicil, or even writing a holographic will. He wanted to change the beneficiary of the house. He wanted to leave it to Ethan. The room spun. But why? He didn't give me the full story, Jack said, his professional discretion kicking in. He just said he had discovered some things, that he had a moral debt to repay, and that giving the house to Ethan was the only way to ensure it was handled correctly. He was very emotional. I advised him that we should meet, discuss it properly, and draft something legally sound. We scheduled a meeting, but he was admitted to the hospital the day before. We never had it, a moral debt. The phrase struck me like a physical blow. Robert was the most ethical man I knew. He was the kind of accountant who would report a penny's worth of discrepancy. What debt could he possibly have? After hanging up with Jack, I felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Ethan's grief-stricken outburst anymore. It was about a secret my husband had carried. My search in his study became more frantic. I bypassed the official files and started looking for things that were hidden. I ran my hands along the spines of the books, checked inside the covers. I looked under the desk blotter. Nothing. Finally, my eyes fell on the safe behind the painting. Robert had told me the combination years ago, but I'd never had a reason to use it. Our anniversary, he'd said with a smile. Easy to remember. I took down the painting, the seascape we'd bought on a trip to Maine, and exposed the small black metal door of the safe. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial. 1022. October 22nd. The lock clicked open. Inside, I expected to find more official documents, perhaps some spare cash or my grandmother's jewelry. But there was only one thing, a thick brown leather-bound journal. It was one I didn't recognize. It wasn't the daily planner he used for work. This was something different, something deeply personal. With a sense of both terror and vindication, I sat in Robert's worn leather chair and opened the first page. The handwriting was his, but it was shakier than I remembered, the elegant loops and slants of his script strained with an unseen weight. The first entry was dated 6 months ago, right around the time he first started feeling unwell. The clock chimed 9. 3 hours left. I began to read. The journal was not a record of daily events, but a confession. Page after page was filled with Robert's tight, controlled script, detailing a story from a past I thought I knew, but now saw as a carefully constructed facade. The grandfather clock's chimes seemed to mark the unraveling of my life, chapter by chapter. 2 hours remained until midnight. Robert wrote about his first business, a small construction company he started in his early 20s, long before he became an accountant, even before he met me. His partner was his best friend from high school, a man named Frank Sullivan. They were ambitious and hard-working, pouring every ounce of their energy and every dollar they had into building their dream. According to the journal, they were on the verge of landing a major contract, one that would have set them up for life. But a recession hit. Money got tight. Robert, who handled the finances, started making adjustments. He described it in painstaking detail, how he began cutting corners on materials, using cheaper, subpar supplies to widen their margins, all without telling Frank. He convinced himself it was temporary, a necessary evil to survive the downturn, but it became a habit. The final betrayal was the worst. A developer offered them a buyout. It was a modest sum, but enough to keep them afloat. Robert, however, received a second private offer from the developer, a much larger amount for him alone, along with a job if he would dissolve the partnership and sell the company's assets for a fraction of their worth, essentially forcing Frank out with almost nothing. In the journal, Robert wrote of his shame, how he convinced Frank that the smaller offer was all they had, that it was either take it or declare bankruptcy. Frank, trusting his friend, agreed. I stole his future, Robert wrote, the words blurred on the page as if from a fallen tear. Frank lost everything. His house, his savings, his marriage fell apart. I built our life, Ellie, our beautiful home, on the wreckage of his. I felt sick. The foundation of our marriage, our family, the very floorboards beneath my feet, were built on a lie. Frank Sullivan, I remembered the name vaguely. He and his wife had come over for dinner once or twice in the very early days. Then, they were just gone. Robert had told me the business failed, and Frank had moved away, a sad but common story. He'd never mentioned the details. He'd certainly never mentioned his own role in it. The journal continued. Frank had died of a heart attack a decade ago, a broken and impoverished man. Robert had carried this guilt for over 30 years, burying it deep under a life of meticulous honesty, as if to atone. But his terminal diagnosis had unearthed it. Facing God, he wrote, I can't carry this lie with me, I have to make it right. And then came the part that involved Ethan. About 2 months ago, Robert had hired a private investigator to find Frank Sullivan's family. He discovered that Frank had a son, Marcus, who was a few years older than Ethan. Marcus Sullivan was living in a town a few hours away, working 2 jobs to support his own family, struggling to stay afloat just as his father had. Robert had started writing a letter to Marcus, but he could never bring himself to finish it. Instead, in a moment of panic and pain-fueled clarity, he had confessed everything to Ethan. He'd shown him the journal, he had made his son promise to right his wrong. The house, Ethan, Robert had written in the final entry. It's the only thing of real value, it should have been half his. Sell it, find his son, give him what he's owed, release me from this. My world collapsed. Ethan wasn't being cruel, he was being obedient. He was honoring his father's dying wish, carrying a burden that wasn't his to bear. His anger wasn't just about my supposed ignorance, it was the fury of a young man whose image of his hero had been shattered. He was mourning not only his father's death, but the death of the man he thought his father was, and he was angry with me for being a part of that lie, even an unwitting one. My comfortable life, my beautiful home, were symbols of a deep injustice. Clutching the journal to my chest, I walked out of the study. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of this secret. I saw Ethan in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, his shoulders slumped. He looked exhausted, the anger in him seemingly replaced by a profound weariness. I placed the journal on the kitchen table between us. He glanced at it, then at my face. He saw the understanding in my eyes. The fight was over. I read it, I said softly. I didn't know, Ethan. I swear to you, I had no idea. He sank into a chair, running a hand through his messy hair. He told me he could never bring himself to tell you. He said you were the one good thing in his life, and he couldn't stand to tarnish that. He didn't want you to look at him differently, so he let me live a lie, I whispered, the pain sharp and fresh. He let us all live a lie. He was trying to protect you, Ethan said, his voice raspy, but he destroyed himself in the process. And he put this on me. Do you have any idea what it's like? To have him confess this to you and then die, leaving you to clean up the mess. To look at you every day, in this house, knowing it was all built on a crime. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not just for me anymore. They were for Robert's torment, for Frank Sullivan's stolen life, and for my son, who had been forced to become his father's executioner and confessor all at once. Why the ultimatum, Ethan? I asked, my voice barely audible. Why so harsh? Why midnight? He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate pain. Because I was afraid if I gave you time, you'd talk me out of it, he confessed, his voice breaking. You'd find a lawyer, you'd fight me, you'd convince me that what Dad did wasn't so bad, that it was a long time ago. I had to do it this way, fast and clean, like ripping off a bandage. I had to be strong enough for him, because he wasn't. The grandfather clock began to chime. 10 o'clock. We both looked towards the sound. 2 hours left. The ultimatum, which had felt like an act of war, was now revealed for what it was, an act of desperation, a misguided attempt by a grieving son to fulfill a terrible promise. The house was still the center of the conflict, but the conflict had changed. It was no longer about possession, it was about redemption, and I had no idea how we were going to find it. The last 2 hours before midnight passed in a strange, surreal calm. The storm had broken, leaving behind the wreckage of our old life and the terrifying, uncertain quiet of a new one. We sat at the kitchen table, the journal lying between us like a sacred text. For the first time since Robert's diagnosis, Ethan and I talked, really talked. He told me about the weight of carrying the secret, the anger he felt towards his father for placing such a burden on him, and the resentment he felt towards me for my blissful ignorance. Every time I saw you tending the garden or redecorating the living room, all I could think about was Frank Sullivan's wife, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Did she have a garden? Did she get to pick out new curtains? Dad took all of that from them. I listened, letting his pain wash over me, absorbing it as my own. I told him about my life with Robert, the small moments of kindness, the unwavering support he'd always shown me. I had to reconcile the man I loved with the man in the journal. They were the same person. It was a dizzying, heartbreaking realization. My grief was now multifaceted, a complex tapestry of sorrow for my husband, shame for his actions, and a deep, aching sympathy for the family he had wronged. The law says this house is mine, I said, looking not at Ethan, but at the journal. My mind, my sense of self-preservation tells me to fight for it. It's the only home I've known for 35 years, but my heart says that your father's peace is more important. So you'll leave? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. There was no triumph in his tone, only a deep, somber exhaustion. I thought about it. I pictured myself packing a bag, walking out the door at midnight, and driving to my sister's house, a refugee from my own life. I could do it. I could surrender, but it felt incomplete. Wodongi P. It felt like an ending, not a solution. Robert's final wish was to make it right. Would simply selling the house and handing over a check to a stranger truly accomplish that? It seemed too cold, too transactional. It felt like another accounting solution to a human problem. No, I said, a new resolve hardening within me. I won't leave, but I won't stay here under the old terms either. We're not just going to sell the house. Ethan looked confused, but that's what he wanted. He said to give him what he's owed. What Frank Sullivan was owed wasn't just money, Ethan, I argued, leaning forward. It was a partnership. It was a future. A check can't repay that. An apology is hollow without action, but selling our home feels like a punishment for us, not a resolution for them. It's running away from the problem, not fixing it. An idea, fragile and uncertain, began to form in my mind. Your father hired a PI. Do you have the report? The one with Marcus Sullivan's information? Ethan nodded, went to his room, and came back with a manila folder. He pushed it across the table. I opened it and looked at the face of the man my husband had wronged. Marcus Sullivan. He looked tired in the grainy photo, but there was a kindness in his eyes. The report detailed his life. A wife, 2 young kids, a job at a hardware store, and another one driving for a delivery service at night. He was a carpenter by trade, but couldn't afford to start his own business. What are you thinking, Mum? Ethan asked, watching me intently. I'm thinking about what making it right really means, I said. Your father wasn't just an accountant. He was a builder once. He and Frank wanted to build things together. We can't give that back to Frank. But maybe we can give a piece of it to his son. I took a deep breath. We're not going to sell this house. It's filled with too many memories. Good ones too, that deserve to be honored, not erased. But we have other assets. Robert had stocks, a retirement account. We'll use that money. We'll go see Marcus Sullivan, not with a check and a story about a guilty conscience, but with an offer, an investment. We'll offer to be the partners for his carpentry business that his father never got to have. We'll give him the capital to buy the tools, the truck, the workshop he needs. We'll help him build a future, not just pay for the past. Ethan stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was seeing me for the first time all day, not as a symbol of the problem, but as part of the solution. He'd think we were crazy, he said, but there was a flicker of something new in his eyes. Hope, maybe, I conceded. Or maybe he'll see it for what it is, a genuine attempt to right a 30-year-old wrong. It's a better legacy for your father than just a sold sign in the front yard. It's a legacy of construction, not destruction. The grandfather clock began to chime. It was midnight, the deadline. We both looked at it, then at each other. The ultimatum had passed, its power dissolved. It had served its terrible purpose to break through the silence and force a reckoning. We sat there for a long time, the folder and the journal on the table. The anger between us had dissipated, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. The path forward was terrifying and uncertain. It would involve reopening old wounds and facing a stranger with the ugliest truth about our family. It would be difficult and painful, but for the first time we would be doing it together. Okay, Ethan said finally, his voice clear and steady. He reached across the table and put his hand on mine. His skin was warm. He was my son again. Let's go see Marcus Sullivan. The house was still my home, but it was different now. It wasn't just a shelter of memories, it was a headquarters for redemption. The night of the funeral, I lost my husband and nearly lost my son. But in the ashes of that loss, we found a new foundation to build upon, one based not on a comfortable lie, but on a difficult shared truth. The clock continued its steady ticking, no longer a countdown to an ending, but the quiet, hopeful rhythm of a new beginning.